My name is Ethan, and I need to tell you something that I've never said out loud to anyone outside of a single phone call at 2 in the morning with my best friend, Marcus, who mostly just listened and said bro at the right times. I own a house. I have owned it since I was 28 years old. I saved for 6 years. Ate a lot of sad desk lunches, skipped vacations, drove a car with a cracked dashboard until the check engine light became background noise. I bought a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, and the day I got the keys, I sat in the empty living room on the floor and ate a slice of gas station pizza because I hadn't bought furniture yet and I was too tired to drive anywhere real. That house was mine. Every cracked tile I fixed on a Saturday morning. Every leaky faucet I watched YouTube tutorials to repair. Every coat of paint I put on those walls with my own 2 hands. Mine. I want you to remember that, because the people in this story forgot it completely. My brother Derek is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one everyone pointed to. Quarterback in high school, naturally charming, the kind of person who walks into a room and people just turn toward him like plants toward light. I was the quiet one. The one who got good grades and fixed the computer when it broke and was described at family dinners as responsible, which is a word adults use for children they don't find particularly interesting. I didn't resent Derek for any of that. I want to be clear about that, because resentment would make this story easier to explain. It wasn't resentment. It was just the shape of our family, and I had grown up inside that shape for so long I didn't notice how much it had molded me. Derek got married at 26 to a woman named Amber. Amber is the kind of person who laughs very loudly at her own jokes and goes quiet when someone else is getting attention. They moved into an apartment near our parents' place in Cincinnati, and for a while everything seemed fine. Then Derek got laid off from his sales job. Then they had a baby, a little girl named Chloe, who I want to say right now is completely innocent in everything that follows and is honestly the best part of this whole story. Then the apartment rent went up. Then Derek called me. He said it would be 3 months, just until he landed something new. He had interviews lined up. Amber was going back to work part-time once Chloe was a little older, and they just needed somewhere stable to land. 3 months. I said yes. I said yes because he was my brother. I said yes because of Chloe, who was 8 months old and had nothing to do with any of it. I said yes because that is what you do for family. Or at least, that is what I believed at the time. Sitting in my house that I had bought alone and furnished alone and maintained alone. And I genuinely did not think twice about it. I gave them the larger of the 2 spare bedrooms. I bought a second set of towels. I moved some of my things into the smaller room to give them more closet space. My mother called me the night they moved in and said, "Ethan, you have such a good heart." And I felt something warm in my chest that I now recognize as the specific feeling of being set up. 3 months became 5. 5 became 8. At 8 months, I stopped counting because counting was starting to make me feel something I didn't want to feel about my own brother. Derek was working again by month 4, part-time at first, and then full-time at a logistics company that paid him decently. Amber went back to work 2 days a week. They were not broke. They were not struggling the way they had been when they first knocked on my door. But the conversation about moving out never came. When I brought it up, gently, at month 7, Derek said they were still saving up and gave me a number that, if I did the math, would take them another 4 months minimum. I nodded. I let it go. I told myself it was fine. What was not fine, though I told myself it was the bathroom. There is 1.5 baths in my house. The half bath is a powder room off the kitchen. The full bath is the main one, upstairs, and it was suddenly being used by 3 adults on weekday mornings, and I was the one consistently late because Amber had a very specific morning routine that involved several steps I did not understand and did not ask about. What was not fine was the kitchen. I had always cooked for myself. Simple things, nothing fancy. But I had a system. My system was gone. The refrigerator was reorganized in a way that made no sense to me. My olive oil was moved 3 times, and once I came home to find my cast iron skillet soaking in water, which if you know anything about cast iron, you know is basically a crime. What was not fine was the living room on weekends. Derek liked to watch sports at a volume that I can only describe as aspirational. I started spending Saturday afternoons in my own bedroom, door closed, reading, which is not a behavior that should be necessary in a space you own. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was what family meant. I made excuses for all of it, filed every discomfort under not a big deal, and kept going. The thing about letting small things go is that it doesn't make them disappear. It just makes you a container for them. My parents came to visit in month 9. My dad, Richard, is a man who has strong opinions about everything and enough volume to make sure everyone knows it. He retired early from a manufacturing job, has a very specific worldview about how men should operate, and has spent most of my adult life explaining to me with great patience and clarity everything I am doing wrong. My mother, Carol, has never directly contradicted him in my presence. I don't know if she disagrees with him and keeps it quiet, or she simply agrees with everything. I have genuinely never been sure. They stayed for a long weekend, Friday through Monday. I took time off work. It was fine for the first day. We had dinner together, all of us, and Chloe was charming and everyone was in a good mood, and I thought, okay, this is nice actually. This is what the house was supposed to be for, people in it, full and warm. Saturday was when it started. My dad and Derek were on the back porch after lunch, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up, and I could hear them through the screen door. Not everything, just pieces. Derek was talking about the logistics company, about a promotion he was being considered for, about how he had a plan. My dad was responding in that affirming tone he used with Derek, low and encouraging, the tone I had heard my whole life directed at someone who was not me. Then I heard my name. I wasn't trying to listen. I was rinsing a bowl, but voices carry and the screen door is thin, and what my father said to my brother in that same low, affirming tone was, "Ethan's always been like that. Doesn't have your instincts. Good thing he's got that house, at least he did something right." I stood at the sink for a moment. Then I finished rinsing the bowl. I put it in the drying rack. I went into the living room and sat down and picked up my phone and stared at it until the feeling passed into the background where I was keeping everything else. Sunday dinner was the 4 of us plus my parents, and my mother had somehow taken over the cooking despite it being my kitchen. And somewhere around the main course, my father looked across the table at me and said, completely unprompted, "You know, Ethan, Derek and Amber are really making something of themselves. When are you going to find someone? You're 31. House is nice, but a house isn't a life." Derek looked at his plate. Amber looked at the baby. My mother said Richard in that soft way that means nothing and changes nothing. I said, "I'm doing fine, Dad." He said, I know. Just saying." He wasn't just saying. He never is. They left Monday afternoon and I stood in the driveway and waved until their car turned the corner, and then I went inside and stood in my kitchen, and something in me was very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. The conversation happened on a Tuesday night in month 11. I had come home late from a work event, still in my work clothes. And I was tired in that specific way where being tired and being sad are hard to tell apart. I was in the kitchen putting together something to eat, and Derek came in, which was normal, and sat at the kitchen table, which was normal. And then he said, "Hey, we need to talk," which was not normal, or at least had a different weight to it than usual. I turned around. Amber was in the doorway. She had been there the whole time. That I noticed. She didn't come in and sit down. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed in a way that I remember very precisely. Derek said they'd been talking. He said the situation had gone on longer than they planned, and they felt bad about that, and I started to say it was fine. But he kept going. He said the thing was, they'd run the numbers, and with Derek's new salary and Amber's part-time income and Chloe's daycare costs, saving for a deposit on a place of their own was going to take longer than they originally thought. He said he'd been talking to a financial advisor. He said there might be a smarter way to handle this. I asked what he meant. He said, and I want to be precise here because I have replayed this so many times, he said, "What if we just stayed? Long term. You've got the space. We could put something formal in writing. We'd pay you rent, help with utilities. And honestly, Ethan, you're never going to fill this place up on your own anyway." I looked at him. I looked at Amber in the doorway. I said, "You want to live here permanently?" Derek said, "We want to be real with you about where we're at." I said I needed to think about it. He said, "Sure, of course, no pressure." But I could hear in the way he said it that he had already decided, that he had already arranged this and his mind is settled. The financial advisor detail, the formality of the proposal, Amber positioned at the doorway like a signal that this had been planned and rehearsed. They had come to tell me, not ask me. I barely slept. I did not say yes. I went back to him 2 days later and I said I didn't think a permanent arrangement was going to work, that I thought we needed to set a real timeline for them to transition out, and that I was happy to help however I could during that time, but I needed my space back. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's pretty selfish, Ethan." I said, "It's my house." He said, "It's your house, and you've been living in it alone for years. And you have more room than you need, and we have a baby, and you can't find it in yourself to just be a brother." Amber from across the room said nothing, but she exhaled in a way that was its own sentence. I said, "I've been your brother for 11 months, Derek. I'd like my house back." He went quiet again. Then he said, "Okay." He said they'd figure it out. He said it in the tone of someone who has put something away but not let go of it. I thought that was the end of it. I need to tell you about the lease. When I bought the house, I had briefly considered renting out the smaller bedroom as a source of income. I drafted a simple lease template at the time, never used it, and it was sitting in a folder on my laptop for years. I had completely forgotten about it. In month 12, my landlord, I am using this word deliberately, because this is the only word I have for what happened next, my landlord's situation changed. I got a letter from my mortgage company, not a statement, a letter, formal, asking me to contact them regarding my account. I called the number on the letter on my lunch break, standing outside my office building in February cold. The representative told me that someone had attempted to modify the payment structure on the loan, that a form had been submitted requesting to add a co-borrower to the mortgage, that the form had included my signature. I had not signed any form. I stood very still. The February cold stopped registering. I said I needed to see the form. They said they could email it. I gave them my email. I went back inside and sat at my desk and refreshed my inbox 14 times before it came through. The signature on the form looked like mine. It was a good attempt. Someone who had seen my signature many times over 11 months. I sat with that for the rest of the workday. I didn't tell anyone. I went home that night and I cooked dinner, and the three of us sat at the table, and I passed the salad and asked Amber how Chloe's checkup had gone, and she said fine, she's perfect. And Derek talked about his week, and I listened, and I said the right things. And inside I was somewhere very far away, very still, making decisions. I called Marcus that night. I told him everything. He said, "Bro," at the correct intervals. He also said, near the end, "Ethan, you have to handle this." And I said I know, and I did know. I spent the next 2 weeks doing things quietly. I called the mortgage company back and filed a formal dispute on the form submission. I followed up with their fraud department. I documented everything. I spoke to a lawyer. Not a dramatic consultation, just one phone call, 45 minutes, a flat fee, and she told me what I needed to know and what I could do and what my rights were as the sole owner of record. She used the word forgery. I had been avoiding that word. She said it plainly, without drama, and it landed differently than I expected. Not heavier, cleaner somehow. I also called the property management contact I had from a coworker whose brother rented out units. I asked what the rental market looked like in my neighborhood. He told me the numbers, and I did the math in my head, and I said I might be in touch. I also set a date. I circled it in my mind. I let it sit there, solid, while life continued around it, the way life does. I gave Derek notice on a Saturday morning, not a confrontation. I had thought about it being a confrontation, and I had decided against it. I was calm. I had written out the key points the night before, not a script, just a list, so I wouldn't lose track of what I needed to say. I asked Derek to sit down at the kitchen table. Amber was there too. Chloe was in her bouncy seat in the corner. I remember the morning light coming through the kitchen window, the way it always does on clear Saturdays. I told them I had discovered the forms submitted to my mortgage company. I told them I knew someone had attempted to add a co-borrower without my knowledge. I told them that the mortgage company's fraud department had the documentation. I told them this was not something I was going to minimize or explain away. Derek went very still. Amber said, "Ethan, it wasn't," and then stopped. I said I wasn't there to argue about what it was. I said I was there to tell them that I needed them out of the house in 30 days. I said I had contacted a lawyer and I knew my options, and I was not asking, I was telling. I said I was not going to involve the police as long as the process was clean and cooperative and the house was returned to me in good condition. Derek said, "This is insane." I said I know this is hard. He said, "After everything, after we trusted you with this." I want you to sit with that one for a second. After they trusted me. I had let them live in my house for a year. There was an attempt to forge my signature on a legal document in order to attach their name to my property, and the framing was that they had trusted me. I didn't say any of that. I said 30 days, Derek. Amber was crying by then. Quiet crying, not performed, and I did feel something at that. I am not a person made of stone, but I also knew that my feeling something did not change what was true or what needed to happen. Derek looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Mom and Dad are going to hear about this." I said, "I know." My mother called me that evening. She said Derek had told her there was a misunderstanding. She said families work things out. She said I was breaking up the family over paperwork. I let her talk. She asked me if I understood what I was doing to Derek and Amber and Chloe, how hard it was for them, how I had always had it easier, because I didn't have a family to support. That sentence stopped me. I said, "Mom, I had been supporting his family, in my house, for a year." She said it wasn't the same. I said, "Someone forged my signature on a mortgage document. That's not a misunderstanding." She went quiet. Then she said, "Ethan, you don't know that it was Derek." I said, "I know it wasn't me." She didn't have an answer for that. My father called the next morning. He didn't open with warmth. He said, "What is wrong with you? Your brother has a child. You have an empty house, and you're going to throw them out over some paperwork?" I said, "It's forgery, Dad." He said, "Don't be dramatic." I said, "The mortgage company's fraud department is involved. That's their word, not mine." He said I was making a mountain out of nothing. He said I was making a mountain out of nothing. He said I had always been difficult. He said Derek had real responsibilities, and I didn't seem to understand what that meant. He said, and this is the part I will not forget, he said, "I always thought you were the responsible one. Turns out you're just cold." Responsible had always been the word they used when they meant boring. Now it wasn't even that. I said, "Derek has 30 days, Dad." He hung up. The 30 days were quiet, tense and quiet. Derek and Amber avoided me in the way that people avoid each other in small spaces, which meant the kitchen had a schedule now, informal but real, and the living room was mostly empty when I was in it. I spent that month getting the house ready, not dramatically, just the things you do. I had the locks rekeyed. I consulted with the property manager again. I spoke to the lawyer once more to confirm everything was in order. Chloe, I want to say, didn't know any of it. She was 14 months old. She was learning to pull herself up on the furniture. Once, in that last month, I was sitting on the floor of the living room and she walked over to me, holding onto the coffee table with one hand and grabbed my finger with her other hand and looked at me very seriously. I held her hand for a minute. That part was hard. That part had nothing to do with Derek. The day they moved out, I was home. I had taken the day off. I helped carry boxes to the truck Derek had rented. We did not talk much. At one point he stopped in the hallway and looked at me and said, "I didn't do what you think I did." I looked at him. He held my gaze for a moment and then looked away. I carried another box to the truck. When they were gone, I stood in the room they had been staying in for a long time. There were small marks on the wall where they'd hung something, a scuff on the baseboard, the specific absence of people who had been somewhere. I opened the window. I called Marcus and said they were out. He said, "Good." I said, "Yeah." We stayed on the phone for a minute without talking much. Benny said to come over for dinner and I said, "Give me an hour," and I went and took a shower and drove across town and sat at his kitchen table while his wife made pasta and their dog put its head on my knee, and I didn't think about any of it for a while. The following week, the first tenant moved in. Her name is Danae. She's a graduate student in urban planning. She is extremely quiet and pays rent 2 days early, and once asked me if it was okay to hang a small shelf, and I said yes, and the whole interaction took 45 seconds. She has been the best thing that happened to this house in 2 years. My parents didn't call for 3 weeks. When my mother finally called, she said she hoped I was doing well. She didn't mention Derek. I didn't either. We talked about nothing for a few minutes and said goodbye. I don't know what that is, the beginning of, or whether it's the beginning of anything. I know that I love my parents, and I know that love doesn't require me to pretend things are what they aren't. Derek has not called. I don't know if he will. I think about what I would have said if any of it had gone differently. If I had said yes to the permanent arrangement. If I had let the forgery go. If I had kept absorbing everything into the container I'd built and just kept going. I think about how easy that would have been. How many people do exactly that for years? Because it's easier than the conversation, Easier than the silence that comes after, easier than standing in a hallway with your brother while he says something you don't quite believe, and you carry a box to a truck anyway. The house is quiet now in the way I had forgotten houses could be. I fixed the scuff on the baseboard. I rehung my cast iron skillet in its proper place. I bought new dish towels, which is a small thing and also not a small thing. On a Saturday morning a few weeks ago, I sat on the floor of the living room, in the same spot where I sat the day I got the keys, eating breakfast because I felt like it. The light came through the window the same way it always has. The house was exactly the size it had always been, no bigger, no smaller. It was mine. It still is. If you're carrying something like this right now, a relationship where your generosity has become someone else's assumption, where your patience is being read as permission, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not that kind of story. But I will tell you that the morning after the last box left, I slept until 8. I made coffee. I sat in my own kitchen in the quiet and I didn't feel cold at all. I felt like myself. And that turned out to be enough. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any abstract way, just in the simple, plain way you think about things after they've already happened and you're sitting in a quiet house on a Tuesday morning with good coffee and no one asking you where you moved the olive oil. What I did for Derek wasn't wrong. Letting someone you love stay in your home when they're struggling. That's not a mistake. The mistake, if I'm being honest, was letting generosity become a habit that other people started to depend on without ever being asked to. I never set a limit. I never said, this is what I can give, and here is where it ends. I just kept the door open and assumed everyone understood, the way I understood, that open doors are still someone else's door. They didn't understand that. Or maybe they did, and understanding it made it easier to push through. I'm not angry at Derek the way I thought I would be. That surprised me. I thought when it was over, I'd feel something sharper. But mostly what I feel is clear. Like something that had been slightly out of focus for a long time. Finally settled into place. Here's what I believe now. Having lived through it, the people who take the most from you are rarely the people who ask the least of themselves. Derek is not a lazy person. He is not stupid. He works hard at his job. He loves his daughter. He is capable of real warmth. But somewhere along the way, he decided that because I was steady, my steadiness was a resource. That because I didn't complain, I didn't mind. That because I kept showing up was costless for me. It wasn't costless. It never is. The cost just gets paid quietly, in small daily withdrawals, until one morning you open your inbox and there's a letter from your mortgage company about a form you never signed, and the cost becomes impossible to ignore. What I learned about intelligence. Real intelligence, not the kind measured in tests, is that it includes knowing the difference between a situation you can change and a story you keep telling yourself so you don't have to. I told myself a story for 11 months. The story was, this is temporary. He's my brother. It's fine. That story was comfortable. It was also costing me something. I couldn't get back the feeling of being at home in my own home. And the courage part. Because there is a courage part, is not in the confrontation. It's not in handing Derek the notice or holding the line when my father called and said I was cold. The courage was in the 2 weeks before any of that, when I was sitting on the information and deciding what I actually valued. Deciding that what had been done to me was not something I was going to absorb into the container and keep going. That took more out of me than anything I said out loud. I think about Chloe sometimes. She'll grow up and she won't remember any of this. That's the right outcome. She doesn't need to carry it. But I hope in whatever way these things travel through families without anyone naming them, that she grows up knowing that kindness and self-erasure are not the same thing. That you can love people fully and still require them to treat what's yours with respect. The house is quiet. Dana pays her rent on time. The cast iron skillet is exactly where it belongs. That's what it looks like when things are as they should be. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just right.